Rupa Huq.
Thanks. I wanted to carry on with barriers, but not so much financial, but social class and mobility, really. Do you see class barriers to participation in sport for girls who can't afford the costs involved?
We've got evidence to indicate that parents have identified extracurricular activities such as sport, and the costs of sports clothing and kit has become one of the top things that they've had to cut back on during the economic crisis. So we knew anyway that access to activities beyond the school site were often inaccessible to those from the lowest socioeconomic groups, but obviously the economic crisis has further deepened those inequalities. And it's why getting PE and sport in schools free to access for every child universally every day of every week is so important, because it may be the only chance we have to introduce them, develop their physical literacy and find a sport they love.
Just to reinforce what Alice said there, 100% agree with that. We opened up 4 schools in last summer with Nike as part of an open doors program, and what we found was we had 2,000 participants over the 4-week program. 61% of those participants were girls, and 82% were eligible for free school meals. And so it is a really important part of utilising the full estate to make sure that when there are pressures, when you're looking at those half-term and holidays, that there is accessible, affordable, high-quality and safe programmes available for children and young people.
And lots of councils, because obviously we're not for profit, we're not our leisure centres are not commercial operations. They have an income, but not to make a profit. Councils are often best placed to be able to provide that subsidised service to those that need it most. And one thing that I think was really interesting, so Tameside Council, they did lots of small investments to underrepresented communities, and it included things like trainers and boots, walking poles, but also, interestingly, sports bras, culturally appropriate swimwear, chest binders, and then other things like skateboards and knee pads that would be across the board. But they were specifically looking at how underrepresented groups, where the cost of the equipment might be a barrier to people actually entering. And the simplistic thing of a sports bra can really make a difference to whether a woman feels confident enough to be able to access the facilities, along with a subsidised, lots of councils offer subsidised swimming or gym membership for those where the cost is the barrier to them.
I mean, we know that half of unplayable venues are in the most socially deprived areas, and you're still a serving councillor. I mean, local government finances pretty much on their knees since 13 years of austerity. You mentioned, Hugh, the scheme with Nike. Are there other things like that? Is that a sort of corporate social thing they're doing to assuage their conscience?
And the Opening School Facilities project that YST, Street Games and ourselves are working on, there is an expansion of that over the next couple of years.
And the holiday activities and food programme, which is 200 million a year distributed through local government, again is particularly the holiday hunger issue has driven that one, that children who are on free school meals are not being fed in holidays, but brilliantly what's been put in is an intervention which gives them positive activities, physical activity and sport, as well as other cultural activities, as well as the food. So that's being run over the summer holidays, Easter and Christmas. It's, I think, 2 weeks in the summer and 1 week Easter and Christmas.
I think there's an interesting, just to reinforce it, I think there's an interesting debate that we have around VAT on physical activity goods and services. We know from our own research that 4 of the top 6 countries in the world have the highest level of gym membership facilities, have a lower or non-existent VAT on physical activity compared to other goods and services. And so reducing the cost pressures on physical activity services, physical activity equipment, clothing is an interesting area to explore, and maybe one for the committee. We'd be very happy to support that. We're having discussions right now with the government on VAT levels on our member services. Our closest trading partner in the EU, Ireland, has a VAT on physical activity at 9%. We are at 20%. And that's one to explore, I would think.
Okay, we were thinking of possible future inquiries.
There we go.
Can go on the list. And you said that obviously there's a difference between what you see on TV, the Lionesses, and the grassroots stuff you deal with. I went to see hockey recently in Ealing. Do you think sometimes some of these sports have an elitist image anyway? Because we know there's a women's Ashes, there's an all-female F1. So at all levels, sometimes some sports, they're seen as snooty and elitist anyway, and then you add the women's dimension. Is that another barrier, would you say?
Well, I'm going to take that one. Should I take a hit for the team? Or?
Well, I'll come. I think that there can be that image, but if you take those local clubs and you put them into the schools, like I say, with Surbiton Hockey going into local schools, we have Chelsea women's team within my borough going in, inviting the schools in to talk to them. I think you can remove some of those barriers. I think it's possibly true in lots of areas, but I don't think it's a big barrier, particularly just for women and girls, more than the generic barrier of I'm not going to take part in Formula One.
Just to reinforce that would be we have a responsibility to make sure that our members' facilities connect with those schools in the right way, so there is that pathway and that seamless sort of engagement with what schools are doing and then how that translates into the wider recreational community. Whilst my core membership is gyms, pools and leisure centres, there's probably 15 to 20 national governing bodies and sports which overlap with our members' facilities. So how we make sure that there is adaptability. I think the majority of recreational football takes place in public sector leisure facilities. And so we've got to think about that transition, making sure that we're doing enough outreach to ensure that these sports there's a seamless pathway from schools into the community.
Yeah, I would like to put a shout out really for national governing bodies of sport. There's currently a national programme called the School Games, which was, if you like, coming back, Clive Efford, to your point, was the backfill when school sport partnerships were disappearing. Jeremy Hunt at the time as Culture Secretary felt that infrastructure was something to at least be protected to some degree and invested in each of the 450 school sport partnership hubs for a 3-day-a-week school games organiser, effectively a competition manager to keep competitive school sport alive. There are now over 40 national governing bodies who have developed inclusive formats that are age and stage appropriate for children. So I think, Dr. Huq, what's happened is we've seen national governing bodies working in partnership with ourselves and others, innovating and making sure that all of their sports are seen as being accessible and inclusive. But coming back to the earlier point, without a school sport partnership infrastructure, you can have that format in school, but how do you help young people transition from the school games and school sport into the club pathway is really hard. And one of the best ways to do that is to create satellite clubs on school sites, which is the first step between physical education and school sport and the club. But you become familiar with the club environment, the club personnel, and then you make your step into the community club. So that, again, I would like to think those concerns that you have are not real now. I think, I'm a trustee of Chance to Shine, an amazing charity doing incredible work with cricket, street cricket particularly, and primary cricket, which couldn't be anything but snooty at all. It's very inclusive and very accessible. But the challenge is, how do we help those young people who've experienced some cricket in the school into a junior club and then onto the main community club?
Yeah, and Ealing Hockey Club, sorry, it's distinctly unsnooty and it has lots of boys in it too. It's not just a girls' jolly hockey sticks thing. So yeah, you need central government, the national governing bodies and local government, which sometimes it can feel a little bit of a low-hanging fruit to get rid of youth clubs, sports facilities. But anyway, sorry, I've just got two more on two other doubly or maybe triply discriminated groups. BAME communities. All the evidence shows they're less physically active than non-BAME communities. What barriers would you say there are to getting them to encouraging to play in grassroots sport? I mean, again, even of the Lionesses, it was a minority of the team, and we've got quotes here from the Chelsea manager saying football is middle class. But yeah, BAME plus class.
I'm happy to kick off that. I think it's a really important area for our partnership with Sport England in terms of being a systems partner and the work we're doing around particular cohorts. I think what's interesting going into the pandemic was the statistics that 1 in 4 members of a leisure facility was from an ethnic diverse community, and so there is an opportunity there to really work with UK Active and our members to understand the data now and actually see what we need to be doing in order to provide that inclusive proposition from a relatively, I would say, interesting point, which was surprising to us, and how we can build on that. I think it's about the inclusivity offer. We know many of our members are very supportive of different cultures and different religious festivals, and making sure that there is accessibility to being physically active when required. But we are on a journey there, and I think we're going to do a lot more work in the coming year, working with Sport England and our members to really understand the motivations and how our membership can provide a more inclusive service there as well.
Yeah, and I think it varies across the country. So I'm going to come back to local government knowing its communities a lot better and reaching out to those communities, because clearly in different parts of the country, the demographics are different, and therefore the response of the sports industry and local government's leisure centres needs to be different in different areas. And I was just trying to find a really good example that I've been given, which is Cherwell. It's their FAST scheme, Families Active Sporting Together, where they've worked with one of their local mosques to deliver private female-only swimming lessons for mothers and children. So things like that is where a council can reach out, recognise that from its own data that it has got an issue, that it's not their facilities are not being accessed by certain elements of the community, then go and speak to those communities through their mosque or religious organisation or cultural groups that exist in the area, and the voluntary and community sector, all councils will have good relationships with theirs locally. They can then find out what those barriers are and look at how they can improve those, remove those barriers to participation. But I do think that's where local government shines, in its different approaches fit different areas, but then also sharing best practice across local government so that we can understand, if it works in Cherwell, would that work over there, so that you can steal ideas from each other in different ways.
Can I just build on that, Liz? Because I think you mentioned earlier about the loss of sports development capacity in local councils and local government, and that taking sport to where people are, rather than sport expecting somehow people to gravitate towards it, is again takes someone to do that. It takes someone to go out and engage with those community leaders and give the opportunity, whether it's sport in a mosque or whatever it happens to be. That needs someone to do that, and sport clubs, as we all know, are largely voluntary entities with people doing it in their free time, spare time after work, and as are the leaders of cultural and ethnic communities, religious communities. So there's some brokering that needs to be done. So I will again come back to, from a school sport perspective, that was partnership development managers, but it was also sports development managers in a local council. We hosted a youth summit in the summer where we had about 150 young people, not all from sports, some were from housing associations, uniform youth groups, a variety of different organisations come together in Loughborough for 3 days to explore what would the next generation like to be saying to all of us, those in positions where we can create the change. And the two things they came forward with as really strong calls for action were, one, make sport have someone like me in it, so they just don't see enough people like them. So to come back to your point, Dr. Huq, things like the workforce, giving opportunities, targeting different communities and giving them opportunities to explore a profession that perhaps they didn't think was for them. For example, teaching, how do we diversify the teaching profession, the coaching profession, and so on. And then secondly, training for those who deliver youth sport, to understand inclusion generally. And they made such a good point. They made a point that coaches have training on safeguarding, they'll have training on disability awareness and inclusive practice. There's no single inclusive practice professional development that people can go through to understand the intersectionality that exists now in our society and really understand how to include. And I do think when it comes to young women from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, purely understanding the cultural norms and expectations of that community is the foundation. And whether you get that from talking to the young people themselves or whether that's something you're trained in, either way, once you have that awareness, you can include. But without that awareness, you risk putting up more barriers.
And then last one from me. What facilities and initiatives are there for disabled women and girls that want to succeed in sport? Because we mentioned the equipment problem. There's also the equipment of a sports prosthetic limb or something that's very costly. There don't seem to be schemes, or if there are, they're when they're little. Once they're 18, that doesn't continue. And we've had evidence from Tanny Gray-Thompson on this as well.
I think Tanny's evidence that she gave around that opportunities for younger children, but when they become adults, that all disappears. There are things that can be done though, just to be positive about it. So something like sports wheelchairs. Again, not every school can afford a set of sports wheelchairs, but a family of schools can own a set of wheelchairs and share them around the schools to give young people the chance to play or to spread those out where young people are in need. So there are things that can be done there, but I think it's an inevitability that if you are a young disabled person, whether that's you have a sensory impairment, a physical impairment or other, there is an additional cost often to have the specific adaptations or equipment that you need to participate, and hence why there are a number of charities raising funds and supporting young people with disabilities to access that equipment.
Just from our side, and as transparency, Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson's former chair of UK Active as well. We are working with Sport England and our operators on a programme called Everyone Can, which is looking at this, firstly from the supply side, so how do we make sure that the facilities are as inclusive as they can be from an equipment perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, making sure the workforce is confident in engaging disabled people and the range of different disabilities that people have. And so that's an ongoing piece of work. We're soon to bring out a self-assessment tool for our members to make sure they're able to benchmark where they are against other parts of the sector. The key part we want to drive forward in the next 12-18 months is around stimulating demand and how we make sure that we find those individuals, those ambassadors, those exemplars who are in our facilities right now, so they can tell their story and help to demystify the journey and the experience that disabled people can have in gyms, sports and leisure centres. And
I think from the facilities, from the local government perspective, it's probably mostly around the facilities being suitable. As I say, too many of our facilities are out of date and therefore do not have the accessibility criteria built into them in the way that we would now do with any new facility. So I think it's looking at those modifications that can be made to improve access for those with a disability, and I would include those with neurodiverse, who may need a quiet space as opposed to the noise levels because of sensory issues. So adapting those facilities as best we can, each council will look at doing that, and then join with Hugh in saying, actually then trying to find the role models locally so that those young people and those with a disability or older feel happy to come into the facility and use it correctly.